Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Three in the Box. I'm here with Tom Lettenberger, candidate for treasurer of USPSA. Tom, thank you so much for joining the podcast. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Bill. I'm happy to be here.
It's my pleasure. I'm going to kind of jump right into questions. The first thing I want to ask that people I assume want to know is to describe your power soccer journey. How did you get involved in the sport and how did it bring you to where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. So my son Charlie started playing power soccer about 10 years ago. There's a local park district here in town that was starting a program. Charlie got into it with a few other people that he knew. They had used their own chairs. We made buckets, with PVC and a bunch of plastic, and they hit the ball around and had a lot of fun doing it. Ultimately, that park district did get a couple strike force. Ultimately, got four of them. That team actually, started getting better, and Charlie loved it, and I thought it was just a fantastic sport. Uh, from there, COVID hit, took a couple of years off, unfortunately. Post COVID, he got back into it again. I spent a lot of time with that team. We actually got them to a couple of tournaments. They were getting, somewhat competitive. And then it came time for Charlie to go to college. He chose the University of Michigan. He joined a team over there, the Motor City Eagles. That's a team that, I also got involved with. We were working towards getting into a conference. Last year went to our first nationals, which was just a tremendous experience. That was a blast being able to see all the teams there. Moving on, while we were with Motor City, attempts to try to make the team, improve. We had Riley in for a 2-day clinic, which, was a real eye opener. I learned a lot. I know the players learned a ton, but I learned a lot too. It was really neat to work with Riley for a couple of days. We went up to the Minnesota camp last year for the first time. By the way, I roomed with John Rivas, who is the new interim board member. I hope he becomes permanent because he's a great guy. I did my referee certification with George up there in Minnesota, which was really cool. Continuing to learn about the sport, all the different little nuances, which I'm still figuring out, to tell the truth. And now Charlie's part of the Turnstile Flyers. So now I've had the opportunity to get involved with that team, and stepping up to a real elite level of play. It's really awesome to interact with a lot of these different players out there and see how this sport can be when you work really hard at it. So it's a fantastic sport. My son's real passionate about it. I'm passionate about it. I played soccer as a kid and as an adult even, and while there's similarities, there's a lot of differences too. But it's a fun sport and something that really opens up great opportunities for some of these people that don't necessarily have another outlet on the athletic side.
Yeah, that's awesome. Um, what? Why are you running to be treasurer? Like, what makes you want to be a part of the board?
Well, I've always wanted to get more involved. It's one of the reasons I did the referee certification, et cetera. But I saw the opportunity at the board, and given my experience, I see an organization, and it's an organization that is striving to grow, and in many different ways. And when an organization grows, they have to make sure that they're disciplined and structured. And much of that discipline and structure can, for good or bad, it can focus around monetary measures. So it involves raising money, building budgets, creating governance practices, compliance, et cetera, all those different things. And I just feel like my professional experience, both at the corporate and the nonprofit level, I believe can assist the USPSA in on its journey towards real excellence, and maybe help avoid some of the pitfalls that can often be experienced by some of these smaller growth-oriented organizations.
For sure. Do you mind if I skip around on? I gave you a list of
Yeah.
questions beforehand, but you mentioned your experience in kind of your corporate role and your nonprofit role. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So my my tale of, kind of two careers. On the corporate role, my real career, I've been in the asset management business for a long time. And what I've done is I manage money for larger institutional organizations. So that involves a lot of protection of capital, growth of capital. Had to go out and raise a lot of money, in many cases in order to make our business feasible, and then become good stewards of capital. That's really at the end what you're doing when you have clients that are putting their trust in you to manage all of their assets. But then on the other side, I've been involved also on the nonprofit side. My most significant role has been with Easter Seals of DuPage and Fox Valley County, which is local here in the Chicago area. And there I've been on the board for about 8 years. And I've been the head of the finance committee and treasurer of that organization for the last 4 years or so. I'm the vice chairman as well, and will likely be moving into the chairman role in coming months here. And so there, it's a great organization, and it requires like many nonprofits, it's tightly run, and money isn't free, and having great corporate governance is very critical. And that's something that I've learned. I don't know that I quite realized it, going into it, but once you really get into it, you realize that in order to succeed, you really do have to keep your eye and have processes and procedures in place to make sure that the organization can be as effective and efficient as it can be, and make sure that every precious dollar that we have is spent in the right way.
How do you see that, like your role there, whether it's on the Easter Seals board or in your asset management career? How do you see that translating into your role as treasurer for USPSA?
There's going to be a lot of parallels, I think. USPSA is, I view it kind of as an organization that is fairly small. I think it's from inside, it might seem large, but it's fairly small budget, comparatively. And I think that there's going to be, one of my things that I would push. I'm sure that it's always pushed for all the time, but I think that we could be a much bigger organization. I think that we could work to get some much bigger sponsors. And we could figure out to be able to grow our budget so that we can be able to really help the sport grow, from attracting new entrants to helping teams, to help, all the way up to, helping the national team, to be able to compete as well. And, to do that, you do have to understand the disciplines that are required to really keep that all in line. And so, I've got half of my world that's always been money related. I've got my other half that's been, more on the nonprofit side. And, money is in the end kind of what, ends up supporting these businesses and these organizations. And it's something that I feel like you always have to have somebody keeping everybody in check a little bit, and really understanding, how it flows through and the needs, and, the ability to track, et cetera. So, I'm not going to say that, it's the same thing I've been doing. But I think, what I can pull from my prior experiences, I think could certainly be additive.
Yeah, for sure. You talked about attracting bigger sponsors. You talked a little bit about attracting more athletes. What do you see, or what do you think would be kind of your main focus, right? Like if you were to win this position, what's your objective coming in?
Yeah, well, as the role of treasurer, I think that's not really a role that says I'm going to go out and raise money, or, I'm going to go out and be recruiting athletes. That's, of course, something that every board member should always have their mind on, but for a treasurer, the main role there is, okay, it's about the money, and it's about the organization, and it's about, having everything in order. So, to become a bigger, better, greater organization, you have to make sure that you stay in line along the way. And, that's something that, I think I would focus on, and, always be supportive in things like raising money. And, I certainly would, that's something that I would like to help with, but I'm not going to tell you that I'm a big salesman that is going to go out and call 10 corporations and have $10 million in our wallet. Yeah,
Sure.
It's, I think that's kind of, one thing I've learned about nonprofits over the years is, the board plays a lot of roles, and every person on the board has different characteristics and qualities, and you want them to complement each other. But one thing they all have in common is that you have to support the growth of the organization, and
Right.
that, it's called nonprofit for a reason. Usually a nonprofit needs money, and that's part of the objective of every board member is to always be thinking, how can we help this organization grow?
For sure. This isn't on the list of questions I gave you, but you kind of made me think of it. Like treasurer, like you said, is very much like a money management role, but you mentioned, your vice chair on your current nonprofit board. I imagine you don't get there by just doing the books. I
Right.
mean, how do you view the sort of dichotomy of the role in terms of I'm the money manager, but I'm also a voting member of this
Well,
board?
that's it exactly. It's, like I said, every board member has a role, or maybe they're just a board member, can also be the case. But at the end, everybody has to work together as well. And, and that means not just knowing what you know, it's kind of putting on different hats and knowing what everybody knows. And, that is ultimately what you would like every board member to know a little bit about everything. And then, those that kind of really get it all, and really understand the mission. We haven't even talked about things like mission, which are huge. But really understand the mission and understanding what it takes in order to achieve that mission. And that's really what, and you mentioned, being vice chairman, that's just kind of understanding the organization and their needs and their wants and balancing all that together.
Mm-hmm. To ask you another question that I didn't prepare you for, one of the sort of proposals in the upcoming AGM is to raise the tournament registration fee for teams.
Yeah.
Completely on the spot, off the top of your head, what are some ways that we can inject money into this organization without asking athletes and families for it?
Yeah, I think that should be a top priority, if you ask me. This is an expensive sport, and even if teams can raise money, it's still expensive. And traveling, the new proposal is going to require even more money because teams are going to have to be traveling. Some teams are going to have to be traveling much further distances, and to say, hey, and by the way, you have to pay more to register. I don't love that. I think that's where we should really be putting our emphasis on getting outside support. And that outside, but that to me, that would be one of the number one uses of getting outside support is to help teams offload some of the costs that they are bearing. In a perfect world, it wouldn't cost any team a single dime to go to a tournament. And, obviously that we're not there yet. But that's a place that I think we should be able to get, at least an allowance of some sort. And these teams are fighting their way to get into these tournaments and to get to nationals, and there shouldn't be a penalty for getting into nationals. It should actually, you should be welcome, and they should be inviting you in and say, we want you here.
I agree. I agree. Shifting gears wildly, most of the attention over the last months, both on Three in the Box podcast and in the general conversation around tournaments, has been this competition restructure proposal, and you
Yep.
alluded to it briefly. What's your opinion on that, and how do you see it changing what we do, and what do you see staying the same or getting better?
Yeah, and I'm familiar with it. I haven't spent hours and hours like many of you have going through everything, but I've talked through it with a few other people as well, and I think overall it's a step in the right direction. I think it's a step we probably have to make when you have a sport that's growing like it is. You do have to make sure that you keep it structured. Um, so I think there's some pros to it. That the regular season means a lot more now. It seems like before, you were in a conference, and as long as you got your minimum number of games, you went to nationals. And that so this does make the regular season more important, which I think is a good thing. Um, you know, Classifications and all that. My daughter is actually a Paralympic swimmer, and so I'm quite familiar with the classifications that go on in these different sports, and the headaches that can come with it. I think adding classification is going to be good for the long term. I was very happy to see that they were delaying the implementation of that, because I didn't think that was going to be remotely possible. To get it in place next year. And it's still going to be a challenge, but I think it's important, and I'm assuming there will probably be even more modifications going forward as to how we implement it. But I think that's going to probably be good, especially at the international level for us. From as a country competing internationally, it's a necessity. As far as cons, I mentioned the cost earlier. A lot of these teams are going to be having to travel pretty long distances, and that's not just cost; it's stress, etc. So that's not great, but maybe it's a necessary evil. I've been having been to nationals. I know it's a lot of teams. I know it's hard to run, but it's pretty awesome. And one of the things that's really cool is that these different players get to meet these players from different parts of the country, and so with not everybody going to nationals anymore, that potentially damages kind of the sense of community a little bit. Just because a lot of these players won't get to go. I mean, they could obviously come and watch, but they don't get to go compete. But at the same time, there's other opportunities out there, like the Minnesota camp. Fantastic. I thought that was so cool. And you have some of the national team players there helping to run it, and everybody. You just get to meet so many different people from different parts of the country. So I would say, maybe we can add some more things like that. Maybe there are more. I only know the Minnesota one. Maybe there are some other ones around the country that are ways to get together a lot of different players, because it's fun to meet those new people. I probably never would have met Big E and Tony and guys like that because they're out on the West Coast, and those are guys that I got to know pretty well, and they're awesome. And I just really enjoyed it. And I know Charlie loves meeting all these new people. So sorry, I'm a little long-winded there, but
no, that's great. I think it's a really important piece of what we're doing. I've had plenty of time on this podcast to share my thoughts of it, but I think it's really important that everybody's tuned in to that, right? And I admittedly, there's good and bad to it. So I appreciate the response.
Yeah.
As we do kind of creep up on our time together, Tom, I want to ask you, and it's probably maybe something you've already mentioned, but I want to ask you what you see as the biggest issue facing the organization, and how do you work on like the big picture items while focusing on the day-to-day operations?
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe some of the bigger issues that the organization is facing are, I think there's still an awareness issue. The sport has grown a lot, but it's I still have to explain the sport to 9 out of 10 people that when I say I'm going to a power soccer tournament. So there's an awareness issue. I think that I think is getting a lot better, and I think that they've done a lot on the marketing side, and I think more can be done there, just to kind of get the word out. Credibility, is something that kind of comes with some awareness, but it also comes with things like international competition, name sponsorship, a growing budget, which is something that I would like to see happen. And you bring all those together, and that really helps in the organization becoming bigger and better. And to me, that's kind of what I see. I mean, I've seen a lot of different organizations, and this one, for better or worse, like I said, it's a pretty small budget, and it can't stretch very far. And I think that we could do so much more, at all different levels. I mentioned from beginners, getting people into the sport, the ability to, maybe we can be helping financing, the purchase of some chairs for some groups, and then travel, et cetera, and the international team, being able to accommodate them and grow that, and become more competitive on the worldwide landscape, et cetera. So all that kind of falls into awareness and credibility, in order to really just build a world-class organization that everybody can look up to and be proud of.
Absolutely. Anything else you want folks to know from you, about you?
This is it's a sport that I've grown to love. 10 years ago, I wouldn't have even known it existed, but I've grown to love it. I know that there are just tons of great athletes and people involved in the sport. It really is just such a neat community to be involved with, and it's something that I've been looking to get more involved with, and I would be very excited to move forward and play a role in helping the sport grow and helping the organization itself be at the level it needs to be at in order to keep that push going forward.
Awesome. Well, I wish we could keep talking. There's a lot more I could ask, and probably a lot more you could say, but I really appreciate you taking the time to join us, and thank you for sharing your thoughts, and wish you the best of luck.
Thank you, Bill. I appreciate the time and the opportunity.
Absolutely. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to 3 in the Box. I'm here with Joe Slaby, candidate for treasurer of USPSA. Joe, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me on the show, Bill.
Oh, my pleasure. Joe, describe your power soccer journey for us. How'd you get involved, and how did it kind of bring you to where you are today in power soccer?
Yeah, I'll try to condense this. Otherwise, we'll be on the show for about 20 minutes. I started playing in 2019, but honestly, my journey began much earlier than that, in 2009. It was, during a period of my life, probably some of the most trying years, but also the most defining as well. I just graduated high school, 18 years old. So for all you mathematicians out there, I'm 35 now. And I got connected. I attended a family conference, which was for individuals with 2 types of neuromuscular disease conditions: central nuclear myopathy and myotubular myopathy. I got connected to that group. It was I needed it at that point in my life. I kept in touch with the group, and somebody from that community was none other than number 22, Mr. Joey Wells, former power soccer athlete, played for Glendale Rough Riders, also a couple teams in Arizona. Although I didn't meet him at that time, I knew him as an author and an advocate prior to, you know, power soccer athlete. I read his book called Through My Eyes. It's pretty much up to that point, his life story, but told through a series of poems. And I, I was so deeply impacted by that book. His words, how he described his experience, despite the fact we had different, um, we were going through different things physically. I could still relate to that adversity he was dealing with, and it wasn't too much long after that that I got word that he was trying to look for people to organize events in their local towns. I, at the time, was living in Terre Haute, Indiana, which is about an hour and a half southwest of Indianapolis, and without even meeting him. And at the time, I was very hesitant to do things. I was kind of in the shell, and I, just made this like I stepped outside my comfort zone, and I was like, I got to bring this guy to this town because if I don't do this, who's gonna do it? And I remember making that decision. I remember where I was when I did it. I still remember what I was doing, and it was like one of the best decisions I ever made. I ended up reaching out to him, connecting, and then I met him in person finally at a power soccer tournament in Fort Wayne in 2012. So this was before Turnstone. So I saw the sport for the first time. I was mesmerized by it, and meeting Joey Wells for the first time, I can count on one hand the amount of times where I've had interactions like that. His has been probably the most impactful. This was literally one of the happiest days of my life. Was the day I met Joey Wells and that friendship that I formed with him. Um, we did that event a couple months later. We just had a blast. The people I invited, it was amazing. And then it was only a few months later after that it was like December of 2012. Um, I'm at this mall just outside of Indianapolis, and this person approaches me. It's Karen Russo, who was president of the USPSA at that time. And who's to say if I would have been receptive towards her approaching me and telling me about power soccer had I not had that positive experience with Joey Wells.
Sure.
And so we spoke, found out I lived in Terre Haute. There wasn't a team in there at the time. So she proposed an opportunity for me to run a clinic. And because of my experience organizing that prior engagement, I didn't even hesitate. I was like, let's do it. And so, I poured my heart and soul into that. I marketed the crap out of that. I was even on the front page of my local newspaper. And in fact, this is pretty ironic, but I believe that newspaper ran Memorial Day of like 2013, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm. For our viewers, we're recording this on Memorial Day. They'll see it a little later, but yeah, that's
so I could be mistaken on that. I couldn't find it online, but I do have a copy of that laying around there somewhere. But I just had a blast doing that. Got connected to the executive director of the YMCA, where we held the clinic, and after all that work, I was able to get a measly 3 other people to the clinic. But Karen, JC, and Natalie, they were generous enough to travel down and make the drive and run it, and we had a good time. Unfortunately, that fell through. And then from like 2013ish or whatever till 2019, nothing. I might have attended a couple tournaments where Joey was playing, but other than that, nothing. So what did culminate from that was I built the confidence, had some skill sets that catapulted me, which ultimately led to a CPA license, graduating college, and kind of getting the job that I'm at right now. I've been working there since 2019, and around 2019 was when I reached out to Karen again, and she got me connected to RHI Inferno, who when at the time Michael Kemp was coaching. That guy has a heart of gold, and I know he's seen a lot of athletes, helped work with them, and ever since then I've been on that team.
Why are you running to be treasurer? What about that clicks
Sure.
with you?
So speaking of awesome players, current treasurer Lexi Hare, who we all know, um, she actually reached out to me and let me know that she was thinking about leaving that role. She knew that I had an accounting background, and she encouraged me to consider it and apply. With my background in accounting, some of the sort of day-to-day duties that the treasurer is responsible and overseeing are things that I'm very accustomed to. And so after thinking it over, it just kind of made sense that if I want to contribute to this league, that's probably the best way I can do it.
What's kind of the major focus or objective of your campaign? What are you hoping to do as treasurer?
Yeah, sure. So, you know, before I kind of explain that, just the role of the treasurer, just an overview. It's pretty much just to record the financial activity, cash in, cash out. This year, right, we have a grant, keeping track of that, the receipts, everything that goes with that, making sure that we have good support there, tracking what is considered the umbrella accounts. So any teams that are affiliated, maybe somebody works at a company that has a matching program where they can donate to a specific account, which is held under the organization, the company will match those funds. Not a lot of teams do that, but a few do. So I would track that activity too. Um, Ultimately, the main idea is to make sure that information is then communicated in a way that the decision makers of the board can use it for the benefit of their decision making.
Sure.
And so it's been fairly consistent year over year up to this point. We are definitely having a few changes for certain, then a potential change in the restructure. So there will be whoever is treasurer, um, whoever wins the vote. There'll be a transitional period between when Lexi, officially departs. So there'll be somewhat of an onboarding session for about 3 months. So I don't know the specifics of what the current process is, but some ideas that I'm thinking to kind of like prepare us for these changes for sure, which I call them the two GRs, growth and grant. So with the growth aspect of it, um, pretty much adding an additional feature to the financial report that is distributed to all team reps instead of having just the one annual financial information piece. Also having prior years there, just to show kind of a comparative um, presentation of how things have changed year over year. Same thing as if you were to hold up to financial reports from 1 year in the prior year, same deal. And then even furthermore, probably a budget to actual column, probably more so used for internal purposes, but just to make sure that the organization is continuously on the right track, seeing where things are lagging behind potentially a little bit, or where they're kind of ahead in budget, where opportunities can be identified. Now, in addition to that is of course the grant, which I mentioned. Um, really learning that, understanding it, tracking that activity, but also helping out those decision makers in providing any new perspectives I can in helping them to extend the life of that grant. I don't know if there's a certain time period when they have to spend all funds, but if there is, making sure that it's used effectively and efficiently. And right, these members on the board, they know how to use these funds effectively and efficiently. It's just a matter of me being an additional set of eyes and giving maybe a different, perspective on it potentially.
Yeah.
As for the restructuring, that's where things can get a little bit more interesting with the financial reporting. Because now we're going to have 3 additional regionals if that gets passed over the span of roughly 3.5 months. And so I think an efficient and a great way to organize that information to really enhance the decision making and transparency of the revenues and expenses is to break out the records into pretty much 3 sets of records for each region. That way, whenever a tournament does occur or expenses occurs in one region, we can have a budget that applies or prorate the budget to analyze where we're at that point in time, to identify if we're on track or behind, to adjust any expenses or any expenditures or revenue intake or grant expenses for the following regionals, and then third one after that, and then ultimately nationals. I think that would go a long ways. And then even from a practicality standpoint, let's say somebody on the board wants a report of referee expenses for the past 3 to 5 years. Let's assume we're 3 to 5 years in the future, restructuring passes. That's going to be much easier to compile that report if that's already broken up, as opposed to if everything's commingled, right? That's going to be a much more tenuous job to do that. And so thinking ahead in those scenarios, setting us up so that the financial records are already ready-made, which is something that I have to think about on an ongoing basis, thinking about how I make our processes more efficient, how things make more sense so that our clients can read them. That's already what I'm well positioned to do. So I can use those ideas to then apply those to that vision that I have.
You've talked a lot about the role of the treasurer specific to that position, but as treasurer of USPSA, you're also a voting board member. So I'm going to ask you kind of the big question, which you talked about a little bit. How do you feel about the competition restructure? I mean, we're a ways out from voting on it. What's your personal opinion on that?
Well, first of all, I guess I got to start off by saying I'm so proud to be a part of this league based on how things are handled right now. The way it's been rolled out, the 3 town halls, the extensive Q&As, the questions and the feedback that people have been providing, George's appearance on your show, additional clarification, questions you've asked him to provide an additional resource, because I also had a few questions on that. And the link that was provided to everyone to provide additional feedback, and they made tweaks based on some of that feedback. They've built in mechanisms to make changes throughout this 3-year probationary period, assuming it gets passed. They sent out, a nice summary, 13, 14-page PDF summary, and then of course we're all voting on it. The way that there's been a healthy dose of debate and conversation, even before this, right? We're all a community that looks out for one another. We connect with one another. We network. But this restructuring has just kind of like provided like that much more thought structure in how this restructuring will impact your own team and then other teams. I think as long as we continue with this process and go this route, this will put us in the best position moving forward.
Other than competition restructure and other than the sort of treasury items that you mentioned, what do you think is the biggest issue facing USPSA today, other than those things? And how do you work on that kind of stuff while still doing the work of being the treasurer?
Great question. I think I'd want to answer that by applying it to my role as treasurer. And in fact, I actually spoke to my opponent a few days ago, and there's a saying, Bill. Uh, Good artists borrow, great artists steal. Um, there might be a debate as to whether I'm good or great, or whether I'm one of those. But there's no doubt that I'm going to steal something that we had in our conversation. First and foremost, I want to wish him good luck. I reached out to him just because I read his statements. We're both professionals in the same industry, and we share a lot of perspectives on things. We also are board members of not-for-profits. Specifically on that point, he said something very interesting, and I do agree. He said the one thing that not-for-profits have in common is that they always need funding. The ITG grant is a phenomenal growth opportunity, and that is really setting setting us up for a decent foreseeable future. Unfortunately, it's not an unlimited supply of funding, so it's never too early to be thinking about the future to ensure that whatever does happen, whatever new implementation improvements come with this granting, that not only are we able to sustain those existing features, but we're able to expand upon it and that we're continuously growing. If I were to, win the vote, I'm looking forward to hearing the board's ideas on those future plans and contributing any way I can to ensure that we're taking those measures beyond the ITG grant.
How do you take what you learn and use in your career and also pair that with your experience as like a coach and team rep? How do you use that to help individual teams grow? And I see that as the role of the board, and I'm talking about things like fundraising, recruitment, governance, resource management, all of that stuff.
Yeah, and it's being the role as a treasurer, like I'll be the money person, and so strategic planning for the most part will probably lay with those other board members. I'm just there as a facilitator to provide them some perspective on the financial situations based on some of their options that they're doing. That being said, I'm still playing that indirect role. And it's also funny that you bring up that experience that I've had with my CPA, earning that CPA license, and also my work experience. My initial answer I provided you with how I got into power soccer was in organizing those events. Those led to me culminating in, going for that CPA and then my career growth. So now all of a sudden it's kind of turning around. That career growth is now setting me up for the role of treasurer. I'll discuss that here after I kind of discuss some more concrete plans from an indirect influence. First and foremost, the power soccer clinics that are sponsored by USPSA, the individuals that attend those typically are, Team USA members. Those individuals have a lot of experience in those types of fields. And so making sure that when those clinics take place, the expenses are reasonably managed and that funding is maximized so that the value is maximized when those figures are there, when, as long as, while they're running the clinics, they're also providing expertise and their own experience on fundraising. More, I guess you could say, greater opportunity than that. The next part is on the restructuring. This would be contingent on if this goes through. during the town hall meetings, when George had mentioned the organic interactions that teams have when they're meeting one another and they're discussing things. So those are forming just naturally. His vision is having greater intent behind that. So he mentioned that during regionals, um, some of those days during the development phases when games aren't happening, those are opportunities for workshops. Those could be related to coaching, referee training, um, adaptive equipment, transitioning from college to a job type experience, and then also he mentions funding and recruitment. And so my role would be helping them to allocate those funds efficiently, depending on what's required for those training sessions, for fundraising, and then recruiting. Now, another way to look at it is, along with recruiting, another important thing to think about is retention, right? Recruiting, you have to you have to come up with unique ideas. You have to put in the work to attract the players. But if you don't have the infrastructure to keep those players, training for fundraising and recruiting loses its effectiveness. And so this is where my skill sets that I've developed in my current job, having to know how certain things in one area impact another area because of how funds are structured at each level, has helped me to apply that thinking towards this. So, for instance, although it's not explicit to fundraising or resource management or governance, or sorry, what was the fourth one you mentioned? Or recruiting. Sorry.
Yeah.
Um, you know, a good culture of a team, a good driver of that is based on the coaching. And so investing in those coaching, workshops to ensure that when a player does show up to a practice, they're feeling engaged, they're feeling empowered. All those things are already in place. Then you have a better chance of retaining that athlete. And so, even though my main focus is on making sure that expenses are efficient, that things are spent in an efficient manner, the fact that I'm able to think about those things that go beyond the dollars and cents, I believe brings additional value to the role.
Anything else you want people to know, Joe, before they make a decision or talk to their team reps?
Absolutely, win or loss. Um, Always think of me as a resource based on what you just mentioned, Bill. Resource management, recruiting, fundraising, and I keep forgetting, at least one of the four. Governance. Um, Even though I may not be an expert in, maybe two or one or two of those items, I can at least help someone get in contact with someone, or they can help that person get in contact with the right person. Never hesitate to reach out to me via LinkedIn, Facebook, or email me as well. That also goes for if anyone is looking for any advice during their collegiate career, trying to transition into a more financial, professional standpoint.
Cool. All right. Well, Joe Slaby, thank you so much. Appreciate the time and wish you good luck.
Thanks so much, Bill. And one last thing, if I could say it, thanks so much for having me on the show. I want to wish Tom the best of luck during this election process. To my team, thank you so much for your support. Thank you for your contributions. The way this team runs is not possible without that. I also want to thank prior players and parents that have made this team so successful, and to the rest of the league, um, volunteers, players, coaches, who else? Um, let's make this nationals the best one yet.
Awesome. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to 3 in the Box. I'm here with Max Brown, candidate for vice president of USPSA. Max, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. Max, I want to hear all about your vision and your ideas for USPSA. But before we do that, tell me a little bit about your power soccer journey. How'd you get started in the sport and then till now?
Yeah. So I've been playing power soccer for a while. Actually started back in New Jersey when I was in high school. So I grew up in New Jersey, and throughout a lot of my childhood, did a lot of track and field, adaptive sports, tried sled hockey, tried table tennis, swimming. And around high school, I learned about this sport, power soccer. And one of my best friends at the time, Bart Stwicki, who still friends with on the team with, he and I both have SMA. So we were always the slowest on the track. We were always the shortest ones to throw the ball. And we discovered power soccer where our didn't matter what our limitations are, abilities. It was one of those sports that we were like, whoa, everyone can like play at the same level, which was amazing. And it was cool because that was, in probably 2010. So we were playing with super old chairs, like really big balls, plastic guards. I think my chair was probably from the 70s. And it was just really cool to kind of experience that. So we joined it was called the Red Bulls back then. I believe they're actually still a recreational team, so shout out to the New York Red Bulls. And then I went to college, kind of took a break from power soccer, went to school in Pittsburgh, and then after school, moved to the Bay Area to work. And funny enough, Bart also moved here, and we decided that we wanted to try to find a soccer team. So we discovered there were a bunch of teams in San Jose. So both of us joined the San Jose Rockets. I played on the San Jose Rockets for a multitude of years through the pandemic. And then after the pandemic, that team was kind of shutting down. We were kind of reshuffling. And funny enough, my friend Bart was moving back to the Bay Area from the LA. And we were like, hey, we should start a team. So 2022, we started the Golden State Ducks in San Francisco, and have been, doing that ever since.
Nice. That's awesome. Why are you running to be vice president?
Yeah, I think for me, I, have seen power soccer grow in my time here, especially since in like the last 10 years. And I think that we're in a really critical point for our sports evolution. I think like we have this amazing foundation. We have so many folks that are super passionate about the sport, but I think now is really the time to like focus on how do we scale, how do we become more mature, how to in like a structured way so that we can continue the successes that we've had so far, but also build upon that. For me, my kind of day-to-day job is a lot of, organization, building products. And I found that I really get excited by like operational things and like getting, just making people's lives easier. So that's the biggest reason, I think.
Cool. Your campaign like statement really stood out to me because you had kind of like 4 pillars of things that kind of resonated with me. Can you talk about those like 4 objectives a little bit?
Yeah, I'll go through them one by one. So the first one is it's around kind of what I'm calling like media live streaming toolkit. So I think one of the things that we know is it's really hard to live stream games, but I think everyone wants that experience, right? We watch a lot of European film, and I don't know if folks do, but they do an amazing job of filming the games, right? Multiple, cameras, a standardized way of kind of showing graphics. So kind of taking a page from that book, I think I would love to create a media toolkit for teams that, essentially makes it super easy, how-to guides on how do you, live stream a game, right? Give them templates, make it easy. Because if I go to someone and say, hey, I need you to live stream every one of your games, like that's kind of a hard thing to do. But if I say, hey, here's, some tools, maybe as an organization, we can get discounted rates for certain technologies, right? But I think that giving people the tools to be able to like elevate their sport, right? Also that allows us to like start getting more games on YouTube, start getting games more on TikTok, Instagram. The more like film that is out there, the more of eyes we're going to get on the sport. I think by the next one, if you want me to, I can go on, is continuing to elevate nationals as a marquee event, and totally understand that there needs to be some sort of level of scale where we need to make sure that, it doesn't get too out of hand, right? I know we've been hearing from the board that the current structure is pretty hard to manage. So I do believe there has to be some level of, maybe scaling down a bit, but from a kind of a destination, I think it needs to still be nationals. I think building out nationals, so not only is it for competitors, but like I would love nationals to be a place where like if you even weren't competing, you were going, right? You want to go to watch the events. You want to feel like a destination for people that are not just in power soccer, right? I would love random people on the street come in and say, hey, what's this event? Checking it out. I think the more that we can get people to see, and by doing that, right, I think we can take what the event that we have and just kind of double down, right? Live streaming every court, right? Making it easier for me to send a game for just one game to my family members, right? Potentially putting together an application where we have the schedule, we have live stream courts, we have the scores all in one place for folks. I think really also bringing in the community, making it an engaging place for, people that are, like I said, in the area to kind of come and visit.
You can just rip through them.
Yeah. The other area that I really wanted to kind of focus on, and this is similar to the kind of media toolkit, but I think that it's really important for us as an organization and every team to continue to push our social media, right? Power soccer is one of the coolest sports to see. Like, I don't know how many times I've like tried to explain it to someone, like, and then you show them the video and they're like, oh my God, that's so cool, right? Like the more that we can get just videos out there using, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, right? Trying to get some more influencers, things like this, right? Like podcasts, is really super important for us to kind of build the visibility of the sport. One small thing that is kind of a pet peeve of mine is if you Google USPSA, we don't show up. And I actually had an experience recently where someone was like, hey, are you part of this Practical Shooting Association? I was like, no, we're Power Soccer. So that's another goal. We need to, increase our ability online. We need to be able to show up in those Google search results if somebody searches USPSA. And kind of on top of that, the last kind of core element that I'm thinking about is really just increasing in transparency and operational, infrastructure efficiency with the board, right? I think we've seen there's a lot that the board has already accomplished, but I feel like there's opportunities to like streamline things, make things easier, especially as someone who, registers the team every year, right? I feel like there's probably opportunities to use a similar system where I'm registering my team, maybe when I go to tournaments, our score sheets are digital, pulling the roster from kind of the main database, things like that. Another kind of inspiration was the town halls that we had for the kind of the recent competitive structure. It felt like those were something that I was like, what, we should be having these all the time, because I think that this community is so passionate that it's really important for both sides, for the board to be able to communicate what they're thinking, but also the greater community to be able to express their ideas and understand why certain things are happening.
Yeah, for sure. I want to dig in a little bit because, like I said, I sort of read your candidate statement and I really, some of that really resonated with me. We only have limited time, so I'm not going to like dig into every single one. I love the streaming stuff and I love the idea of like making that easier for people, right? Like you talked about like a kit or some sort of like way to help folks do that. I think we keep hearing this idea of like post your games, record your games, like get this stuff out there, but we don't really give teams the resources to do that. And so I think that's a huge piece. When you talk about keeping nationals as like the marquee event, I
Yeah.
feel like that really resonates with me, and I feel like it's going to really resonate a lot with the membership. But you mentioned needing to scale, right? And it's interesting because in my like work, we talk about scaling things, right? And so my question, Max, is like, what are some ideas to scale it? And I don't expect you to solve the whole problem right here on this podcast, but what are some ideas to scale it without taking that nationals as the marquee piece away?
Yeah, I think so. One thing that I was thinking about, and this is a way to potentially scale the event to be even larger, right? One of the considerations this is, under the organizational elements, but if we're considering Fort Wayne, right, there could be other gyms that are additional facilities, right? When thinking about an event like the Olympics, right, that's like a very extreme example, but they have multiple venues for kind of their events. So one of the ways that we could start thinking about nationals is, there is maybe a core venue, but as we know, power soccer can be played on many different surfaces, most likely, basketball courts, which are pretty common in Indiana, and elsewhere, right? So that I think is one option to kind of scale it higher. Another one, right, is to if that's not possible, right, can't do that in the next 1 or 2 years. I think there is kind of an important piece about thinking about how do we either create another conference, right? I know that is sort of in the plans, right, to allow folks to be able to continue to grow. But I think the other piece is potentially breaking it into 2 weekends if necessary, right? I think for me, it'd be looking at what are the options that are available, and figuring out what is the best thing for the sport at that time. I think it's going to take a few years to transition into a kind of a new working model. But either take what we have, try to expand the venue, or potentially split it up, I think are two, relatively straightforward ways to try to keep that event intact.
One of the things I heard you say was sort of transparency in governance. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but as like vice president, as a member of the board, and you mentioned the town halls, how do you keep the membership not only like engaged, but informed of what you guys are doing? Because my personal pet peeve is like, it feels like we find out about things way after they're actually happening. What do you do to address that?
I think, it's all about, I don't know how often the board meets, but let's say I assume they meet once a month, every 2 months, right? It's so easy now to have AI generate notes, create reports, right? I think the just simple email blast every quarter, hey, this is what the board is up to, doesn't take that much work, but I think will allow folks to really start to build back that trust if there is that little bit of like, oh, we don't know what's going on, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Switching gears a little bit, we've talked a little bit about the competition restructure. We've talked about the things that you kind of want to implement.
Yeah.
If we set that stuff aside, I know that's like the major stuff, but what else do you see as like the big issue or issues USPSA is facing as it goes into the next season? And how do you I guess it's a two-part question, because how do you address all these things at once, right? You get 1 or 2 years, 2 years as vice president. What's another big issue that you want to work on, and how do you do that along with all the other things you're trying to do?
Yeah, I was thinking about this, and I think like a existential issue with our sport is the cost, right? And there's very few sports that you have to casually drop $10,000 to play. And I don't have a solution to that, but in my mind, I think that every decision that needs to be like the something in the back of your head of like, is this going to reduce costs? Is this going to increase costs? Because at the end of the day, things are getting more expensive everywhere, right? So for me, I think that is a huge risk to us, to our growth as an organization. And it's something that's like kind of like a sleeping giant in the background where, I think things like, going for grants that are going to reduce certain operational costs, great. Being able to kind of just keep that in the back of our minds as we're approaching things. I think that's really key.
Yeah, for sure. I honestly don't think we talk enough about cost in this sport and like sort of the barriers to access. So I appreciate that. You talked earlier about being one of the co-founders of Golden State Ducks. How do you take what you learn in the process of starting a team and use it to help other teams grow? And I'm thinking like fundraising, recruitment, governance, just management of resources. How do you take that stuff and apply it to this role?
Yeah, so we've learned a lot, and I would say like we've done things that have worked and we've done things that haven't really worked. And one of the things that, and this I don't know if will apply for every single team, but something that we were able to do kind of really quickly was create a relationship with the city of San Francisco. And one of the things that I definitely would recommend to new teams and teams kind of looking is reach out to your like local governments and look for kind of potential opportunities. Again, it's not going. Every city is not going to be San Francisco. Every city is not going to be San Jose that has like large therapeutic programs. But one of the things that we were able to build our relationship with them. So we are able to use city gyms. We've gone to some events with them. And I think building on and trying to reach out to your local community, I think is super important to starting a team. Another thing that we did, which I think has been pretty impactful, is I don't think people like, I think we tend to have a lot more fun sometimes, it seems, than other teams. Like, and that sounds kind of weird, but we like, maybe it's because we are player run and we're closer to the same age, but we tend to like focus on having a lot of team dinners when we're in tournaments. And like I've spent a lot of time on our branding. That was my I'm background as a designer, so like I've had a lot of fun with that. Just like being able to kind of bring a fun experience, right? One of our like catchphrases came from like one of our teammates who was like yelling out during nationals, and we're like, oh, that's great, gotta throw it on the shirt. So for me, I think that's one thing. But from a like more tactical perspective, like recruiting is really hard. That is one thing we learned. And we've gotten lucky that we've gotten folks from other teams that have transferred to us. And this year was actually, we've gotten one of our new teammates from the city of San Francisco in an event. But I don't necessarily have those answers for you. If I did, I would have a 20-person team. But I think like that's kind of where I would kind of recommend folks is, try to like think of your local government, local resources, and have fun with it.
I've tried to, in all of these interviews, mix in a surprise question. So I'm going to throw kind of a surprise question at you. One of the things that came out with the AGM materials and the competition restructure proposal was a separate proposal to raise the team fee by $100 this season. How do you keep costs low for players and families while still making sure the organization has enough money to function and keep growing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good question. I think increasing membership rates is only going to give so much, right? If you look at the overall budget, it's not $6,500 is going to help a little bit, right? But I do believe that for us to be able to reduce those costs, it's going to have to come from either like donations, corporate partnerships, sponsorships, things like that, where we can kind of at a higher level try to reduce those costs. I think part of what's tricky is, I would hope that I can, once I get, if I am voted in, I'm able to, have a better understanding of kind of how things work. Because that's, I think, part of what's tricky is it's, as an outsider in, it's hard to kind of give suggestions because I don't know all of the details. inside. But I think for me, that's kind of where I think I would be kind of focusing on
Sure.
is how do we use outside forces to kind of increase our budgets.
Yeah, for sure. Anything else you want people to know about you or your plans or anything else I didn't ask you?
Yeah, I think for me, it's like at the heart, would be just excited to kind of hear from folks too, whether it's, I'm probably I think I'm gonna email some teams, but if anyone else wants to like reach out to me, my email is heymaxbrown@gmail.com. Very easy. But I feel like at this point, I've gotten so much from this organization, from the sport that I really want to give back. And this is the way that I feel like I can kind of provide the most impact.
Nice. Well, Max, I really appreciate you taking the time to share your thoughts with me and with everybody. Wish you the best of luck.
Yeah. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to 3 in the Box. I'm here with Brett Passmore, the current vice president of USPSA. Brett, thanks so much for joining me.
Hey, thanks for inviting me to be here.
My pleasure. Brett, you're running for re-election as vice president. Just going to ask you some questions about that. Before we get started on the topical stuff, tell me about your journey. How did you get started in power soccer and how did it bring you to where you're at now?
Sure. Yeah. So power soccer for us started in 2014 when Kirsten participated in a clinic at an Abilities Expo in Houston. And we saw a exhibition game between the Houston Fireballs and the Houston Dynamos, taking in our chairs and having a round out game there in one of the city gyms. And at that point, she was like, okay, this is something I want to be involved in. And being her parent, Amy and I pretty much, if she wants to get involved, then that means we're both involved, right? So we started in 2014. We each have skills we're good at, right? I am pretty good with the logistics and the maintenance and making sure our athletes have what they need. Back then, it was before Strike Force chairs were a thing. So we were modifying the old chairs, the C300s and F3s and stuff, and making these front wheel drive chairs perform as good as they possibly could, modifying guards and all those things. And all the while, Amy and I were working on what does the organization look like? What does the leadership look like? How can we grow it? We had some good pieces in place, but we've seen what happens when leadership transitions go awry and some of the contacts are gone and relationships aren't built for the organization. So we got to learn through that, right? We also got to see how important that logistics piece becomes. We're very fortunate down here in Texas that I have the ability to help with that for our team and notice that other teams need assistance as well in these areas. And so we're able to build those structures and help other teams with our resources. But growing up, 5 years goes by, give or take. Kirsten gets her Strike Force. She was faithful and continued to play and to be involved in the sport. And we go to our first camp and we realize our first nationals, we realize this is much larger than just Houston and San Antonio playing some soccer games, because down in Texas, we don't have other orgs close to us. And so seeing nationals for the first time in the community and the family that's there really just cemented everything. And for me, it became much, much bigger than a competition between these two cities or even us and other teams outside of this. It is how much independence and leadership and confidence and community that the sport creates. So the deeper I became involved, the more I realized how much all the invisible volunteers actually hold everything together, not just here in Houston, but in the whole organization. And it was really something else.
You were nominated and appointed to the board. What was it that made you accept that nomination, and why do you want to continue in the role?
Well, it's interesting. You and I've actually had this conversation several months ago. Steve approached me months before I accepted, and I had a lot of responsibilities down in Houston, not just Fireballs, but my wife and I own a pretty successful IT service firm down here and some other businesses. And so I wasn't really of the mindset to be able to have time to do this. And I really don't think people realize how much time that this takes to be done correctly. And so I was hesitant. I didn't want to do it. And I told Steve that there's probably a better person out there several times. And he was pretty persistent. And he had his reasons for being that way. And so, my worldview. My wife and I prayed about it. And we talked about what this might do for our time. And we decided that this is the right time. If something's going to happen, let's go ahead and let's be a part of this. I'd never even considered being on the board before. I never ran for any of the positions here. I was just happy taking care of our situation down in Houston for our team and our other family obligations. So Steve was persistent. He knew there was a problem. And so I think the best way to approach it is I was originally reached out to when USPSA leadership recognized, and this was Steve, right, that the organization needed to begin thinking more intentionally about sustaining the sport, growing the sport, and the partnerships. He had his eye on his next growth chapter, which is working with US Soccer as an at-large board member. He'd no longer be here, but he knew these relationships needed to be fostered, and he thought that I'd be a good person to help build these systems and these organizational pieces to sustain them and work with these relationships. So hope that answers that first part of the question. Does that get what we need?
Yeah. What is it that makes you want to continue in the position now?
Well, this first year was really just about learning the realities of this particular nonprofit governance and beginning to put support structures around it. 4 months into the seat, you and I had a conversation about what Project Flywheel is, right? And that name has not been rolled out to the community at large. It's just an internal thing. But I touched base with you on the market reach, right? I talked to you a little bit about how I view the market, why I think growth is possible, and why I think growth is important for us. We can all go back to the Tommy Boy movie. If you're not growing, you're dying. And it is a joke. It's a trope in the movie, but it's true. It's in business. It's in this. If we are not growing, then what's left to look forward to here? And I think it's important, but it got to do it. We have to do this responsibly, and it can't just be done unilaterally or ad hoc. We have to have a plan and the support system around it.
What major initiatives have you implemented or begun during your tenure, and which ones still require further work?
Sure. Okay. Well, initiative as far as programs and operation, I want to touch base as part two of this answer. The first initiative was me to actually understand what is going on, right? USPSA, if you are not involved at the board level, if you don't know the machinations of how things are set up, you wouldn't realize how much it is actually takes from its board and from volunteers to do this. So my first initiative for me was to understand what this looked like, where the weaknesses were, how do we approach them? And after I was able to put a framework around where I see the problems, and I used my experience with the businesses, my experience with the nonprofits, some of my background, and I was able to look into where I thought the organization needed help. My major initiatives were born out of that initiative that I had to go through, that exercise to get there. I hope that makes sense and why I'm answering it this way. So the first major initiative that's actually in flight now is our Warrior League. There was a start of this by some people out in LA a couple years ago, and it kind of fell apart. There was no system put around it, and it wasn't an official sanctioned piece of what we do as an organization. But we have now finally assigned leadership roles. We've documented it. We now have relationships with the PVA, and we are going to be represented well at the National Wheelchair Games in Detroit this year. And we're actually going to be on one of their keystone panels for the sport. And we have got systems in place to be reaching out to VAs at the locations where those athletes are coming from to help host clinics. And so we've got a good pipeline that we're establishing to get veterans into the sport. And a surprising win, we've identified 32 athletes that own Strikeforce chairs that aren't registered with USPSA. They just play locally with their own thing. And so these are opportunities that we didn't even know would exist inside this when we started on the path. We just knew that we needed to make a strong pathway for these veterans to step into the sport. And I'm very excited about that one. And the next one is we've been trying to be purposeful on our marketing and communications, right? Before it was pretty ad hoc or willy-nilly. There was no cadence or method when something happened. It might get posted to socials or the web, or it might not. It was almost an afterthought. And so we've been trying to be very purposeful in how we build recurring communications, how we present ourselves to the wider world and to the organization itself. And I believe we've been mixed results, but in general, I'm very proud of where that's going and how good Ben Anko has done in that role. And we're always looking for more volunteers and more skills to help make that happen. But I'm very proud of what we've done in that capacity. One of the bigger things that's flying behind the scenes, but it's going to be unveiled. Well, by the time this gets aired, it will have been unveiled last weekend. Power Hub. Power Hub is our internally developed infrastructure software for USPSA. It is a bespoke software that we have scoped and built through volunteer support. Brian Broyles is our CTO. We appointed him several months ago to operate and facilitate this and to project lead this effort. But this allows basically long-term operational infrastructure. This is going to be where registration occurs. This is where all rosters will be fitted out for any sanctioned tournaments. It's available for any team to use to build their tournament rosters. It allows very quick access to build the seeds and to build your brackets. It allows you to track stats nationwide. It's going to allow us to publish them to the website in real time. It allows scorecards to be handled in real time. So we're pretty excited. That's a big one for us. And so that's coming. And we're going to see it in California at the tournament coming up this weekend. I'm pretty excited about it. It's also going to run the infrastructure for us at Nationals this year. So that's pretty cool. Another one is right alongside the veterans program. The collegiate program has been a very important aspect of what we want to do here for a while. We all know that Peyton and Zach and Sarah had the project for Adapt and Thrive to build the model for collegiate program. And that was part of what helped start the Auburn program where Zach is at. But we know that program is not sustainable without Zach right now, right? So we want to figure out, what does this look like? How do we build a program that is actually viable, sustainable, something that we can count on for our members to copy and paste as much as possible to the next college? Our goal is to get 4 universities plugged in, Auburn being the first, in the first 18 months. I really think it's a doable thing. And so obviously you know more about this because I've been talking to you about that particular one, but I'm pretty excited. I think there's a lot of work to be done there, but we've moved from discussing it into organizing it. And so I believe that's exciting. Another thing is the partnerships. I've been really working on a lot of our partnerships for our organization were personality driven, and that part hasn't changed, but we're working on it. What I mean by that is our relationship with MK Battery was driven by Steve, right? Our relationship with Biogen was driven by another person. These were siloed into relationship with people. And I am trying to very systematically bring those together and tie them to the board as a whole, tie to the organization as a whole. So when leadership transitions, and it always does, those relationships don't get weaker. They don't become fragile, right? We want to be able to have the tie-in from, if it's US Soccer, if it's MK, if it's Power Soccer Shop, which is an interesting one, if it is the discussions we're having with CAF, the Challenged Athletes Foundation, right? Or the discussions with the WFA on their live stream efforts. These are the relationships and partnerships that we want to systematize where we can. There will always be the personal connection, but we want to make sure that there is a governance transfer whenever leadership does transition. And so that's an important piece for us, and that is in work now. What still needs work for us? Volunteer capacity. We need to be able to manage our volunteers better. We have some wonderful volunteers that come out and help and grow, people that want to be on the board. Anyone who wants to be on the board, we want you, right? Any position. This organization has no shortage of ideas, right? We want to do a lot of things. What we have is a shortage of coordinating these volunteers to get it done effectively. So that's a big deal for us. So volunteer coordination that needs help. Fundraising needs help. Operational sustainability, it needs help. Leadership pipeline. These are some of the risks that I identified last year that I had to start figuring out, what does this look like? That's what brought up that the proposal on the AGM for adding a board seat, a non-internal seat that's a voted seat. So I want to be able to have some operational pipelining, basically, so where we can have leaders outside the organization, vice president at a at a hospital, a major system that speaks to or is a sponsorship with us, that they can be on our board, help us work through these things. They get an open door visibility into what we're doing. These are things that I think are clearly needed for a nonprofit of our size, to give us more legitimacy. So these adding legitimacy, adding clarity to these roles, this is all important stuff. So we've been foundation building this last year. And we're in the early process of building these support structures that we need for the long-term growth. And it's going to be a little bit of change piece by piece.
You and I have talked a lot about the competition restructure proposal. As a candidate, how do you feel about that proposal?
Well, that's an important piece that you need to realize in how I operate in this. I operate really strongly in certain, we're going to use the word lanes, even though it's way overused. My operational lane is in the organization and the structures. It is not in the sports side of things. All right. So with that said, there are absolutely legitimate organizational and scalability problems driving the entire discussion. I don't believe there's any way around that aspect. At the same time, and I'm one of the ones, I completely understand why people are emotionally connected to our current system and the Nationals experience. I made the comment before, showing up in Turnstone in 2019 and seeing the people in the community and realizing that, oh my God, we're not alone out there. It was huge. And so I emotionally connect. So to be very clear, whatever direction we take, the growth needs to strengthen our community and the integrity of the sport, period. I don't have the sport aspect background to say this system is better than this system. I can look at pros and cons of what's been presented by the director of sport and his committee. I absolutely can see where it has merit and where it does not. My thing is, whatever George and the committee have brought, whatever is done, let's say this gets voted down, something else is brought up, or if this passes, my job is to make sure the organization is able to have the foundation to support whatever is decided so it can grow and move on. That's the only way I can look at it, because that's my specialty.
That's fair. That's fair. What are some issues that you want to work on that you haven't had the chance to in your first year? How do you address those if you get 2 more years as vice president?
I kind of touched a few of these in that last answer. Again, we don't have the idea problem, right? There's lots of ideas. We just have this capacity issue. So some of the bigger things, we need to figure out how to have better, stronger volunteer coordination. We have lots of people that want to be involved. It's very hard to assign them stuff. We have had reach out efforts to find other people in areas to do things, and the communication lag was there. So I want to improve communication, right? I want to have a better coordination. We need to have better feedback from our members to the board. And you probably will have seen some effort on that just today. Leadership development. How do we make sure the leadership that's in the organization is mature to run the organization, right? It's very easy to have a very short-term view here, 2 years as president, 2 years as vice president. Some people don't want to run more because it's frustrating when things don't run well and a few people are doing everybody's work. So I think having these support systems around that allow our volunteers to excel is going to be critical. That's one of my biggest things, because we see burnout all over the place because we have people that volunteer. They want to get involved and everything gets dumped on their shoulders. And what do you do with that, right? I mean, you can only take so much of this. Now, there are some people who are, come hell or high water, I'm involved and I'm doing this forever, and wonderful, bless you. But the fact is, you cannot do this forever. We have to have systems in place that make this more sustainable. And these are buzzwords, I get it, but it's actually the truth. And when you see it in operation, when you see it, how it hits the shoulders of these people, it becomes very, very obvious. So we need stronger volunteer coordination. And we need support systems so our organization can grow without overloading just a handful of people. That's the number one thing for me. Because all of my projects in Flywheel, the learn, play, lead, the breaking barriers, right? All these things that I'm trying to do, that requires a healthy volunteer pool, right? Not overloading people. And we need to be able to communicate that vision clearly so we can continue to get more volunteers in.
Okay. Brett, you have an important role with Houston Fireballs and have for a little while. How do you take what you've learned in the process of your work with Houston Fireballs and use it to help teams? And I'll ask you to hit, like, you don't have to hit on all of these individually, but thinking about fundraising, recruitment, governance, and resource management. How can you take what you learned with Fireballs and apply it as vice president to help teams?
It's a good question. I think one of the best things is being able to build those relationships. I'm going to back this in. There's no control C, control V for taking a program that's successful and planting it somewhere, right? That doesn't exist. And it's one of the challenges that I've assigned with the collegiate program, right? You can't just do one and make it similar, but I want the structure. What does the outline look like, right? And then we know that there's restraints inside that and there's limitations. What's worked in Houston, our fundraising efforts won't look the same over in San Antonio, right? Some teams are siloed into a corporate sponsorship. Some are siloed into the YMCA, they're local. Some have city ties. Some are completely separate. I think the key component is understanding how to raise up leadership that can rise to what those challenges are in the unique communities that they're in. And that community can experience different challenges even over the life of the program. I know that our program has faced extreme difficulties and setbacks at times, but we've been pretty successful with having some core leadership in place to make the right decisions. I wish I had a way to say, do fundraising like this, check these boxes, and bam, it's going to flow in. It's never that easy. The realities of life are these are relationships, and these are epoch based, right? These are times. The things that work now for Houston Fireballs may not work next year, quite honestly, but you need to have leadership and the ability to have people that you can look up to, look over to say, what has worked for you there? And we are available for that. And we have done that for other organizations now. Now, we are very well aware that we have some things in place in Fireballs that other organizations don't have because we have built fundraising in a certain way. I am happy to share those things. And I'm trying to mirror some of those things up with USPSA. But I believe the most important part is how do you work through these community-centric items, the things that are the realities facing that program, whether it be logistical space, transportation of chairs, fundraising for a chair, awareness, all the different types of things that hit us, travel costs, right? Having leadership that can help address that effectively and has the humility to say, hey, Bob, I don't know what I'm to do here. What can you do? And hopefully they can look to the USPSA, right? And we can have some better advice to give them. My goal, and it's always been, is to be able to transition whatever leadership is to the next generation. And right now, Amy and I are in that process. We have new parents and new athletes joining the sport. Amy and I are well in the steps of moving away from leadership with the Fireballs, right? We'll still be involved because we're managing partners of the nonprofit, but daily leadership and these things won't be in our hands anymore. We have entrusted that to the next generation. And I believe that's a healthy thing to do. I believe what I'm telling you here is the example in that. We've tried to build a sustainment leadership one after another that knows how to do these. And again, I wish the answer were, Bill, if you did this one thing, it's the secret, your program is going to be perfect. It just doesn't exist. You have to have someone in leadership that can recognize those issues. And most of our programs have someone there. But usually we have to reach outside of our own knowledge base to grow and do these things. The goal can't be cloning someone's model somewhere. It's got to help teams build sustainable structures in their own communities. I really believe that's got to be the goal. And with our knowledge hub and with how we want to build and do USPSA's foundational pieces, we have to support our local teams and programs to grow. There's no way around it. Fundraising is critical from the bottom all the way to the top. We have a fundraising issue at the top, even with, being so fortunate to get the Innovate to Grow grant. That doesn't solve problems. I mean, that's for a specific purpose and set of tasks, but we all have to figure out where we're at. And I think the best way to handle this is have a leadership pipeline in place that knows when transition happens, they can continue on, have peers available to you can talk to about what's the best way to do this, and develop personal relationships with those others in your community, whether it be community centers, whether it be clinics, whether it be businesses that are receptive to your lesson, what you have to say. That's the best answer I can offer you here, Bill.
Sure. Anything else you want folks to know, Brett, as we head towards the AGM and the voting process for this?
Yeah, I think I have some things. First, I love this sport. My daughter starts law school this next semester, and her time at the level she's been at will be winding down. Right? That's just what happens. So I genuinely believe, though, that USPSA is at one of the strongest and most visible points in its history. None of that happens automatically. This has to be focused. My focus is helping us build the support structures, partnerships, leadership capacity, operational sustainability, what is necessary to continue growing. I don't want to lose any of the athlete-centered culture. I don't want to lose any of the volunteer spirit. That's some of the stuff that makes this community so incredibly special. So the future, it won't be built by one person or one board. It's going to be built by our athletes, our families, our volunteers, our refs, our coaches. They all got to pull in the same direction. And I just want to say we got some horrible news this morning, right? And it just shows how important the community is for our sport. When you are with these people, right? And these are not just athletes and competitors, these are family. This is not just community, this is family. And when one of our family is hurt, we're all hurt. We've been through that in Houston, and other programs stepped up for us. None of that can be lost. We have to hold on to that aspect and that heart of what USPSA is. It's a non-negotiable. And so I just think it's critical that we don't lose that athlete centered, that volunteer piece, the community that makes us so special compared to other organizations. This is unique. We have something very unique, and I treasure it. And I want to be able to have this available for several generations to come.
Brett Passmore, Vice President of USPSA, thank you so much for taking the time and for joining me on 3 in the Box.
Take care, Bill.
You too.